The crystal glasses on the dining table glimmered under the chandelier, scattering light like laughter. Brittle, fragile, easy to break. It was Daniel's birthday, and Elena had spent the entire morning arranging everything to perfection. The linen napkins were folded into swans, the cake matched the color of his tie, and the guests were all people he wanted to impress, not people she cared to know. She moved like a ghost between them, smiling, serving, nodding. The perfect wife, the perfect hostess. Every gesture polished by years of quiet obedience. When she finally set his glass of champagne down, she caught his reflection in the mirror, laughing, leaning close to his mother, the woman who had never let her forget that she wasn't society material. Then she heard it. Daniel's voice, low, amused, and cruel enough to slice through the music. "That fat woman disgusts me," he said, not even bothering to lower his tone. "I married her for her connections, not her body." His mother chuckled, covering her mouth in fake sympathy. For a moment, Elena thought she'd misheard. The world blurred, the music dulled. Her heart pounded in her ears like distant thunder. She wanted to turn, to face him, to demand why. But her hands froze around the edge of the tablecloth. A single drop of wine trembled in her glass, like her breath, ready to spill but holding on. She smiled instead. A practiced, porcelain smile. She kept talking to a guest about the roses in the garden, her voice calm, her eyes unblinking. Pretending she didn't hear was the only armor she had left. Later that night, when the laughter had faded and the guests were gone, she sat alone in the darkened kitchen. The candlelight flickered across her face, catching the reflection of unshed tears. His words replayed again and again, carving deeper wounds each time. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had built this life, cooked his meals, held him through every triumph. And she whispered to herself, "He disgusts me more." Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of rain. Something inside her shifted, small but certain, the sound of a woman breaking, not into pieces, but into clarity. Tomorrow, she decided, she would wake up and pretend again. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel. Morning sunlight crept through the curtains, tracing pale gold lines across the floor. Elena sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with slow, mechanical strokes. Her eyes were swollen from the night before, but her hands moved with steady grace, the kind that comes from habit, not peace. Downstairs, the staff prepared breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread filled the air. She caught her reflection in the mirror again, the same woman as yesterday, but something about her gaze had changed. It was quieter now, colder. When Daniel entered the dining room, she was already there, arranging his plate the way he liked. 2 eggs, one yolk slightly runny, toast cut diagonally. "Morning," she said softly, her voice steady as glass. He kissed her cheek absently, scrolling through his phone, unaware that the world had already shifted between them. She smiled back, not out of love, but strategy. He didn't deserve to see her pain. At the table, his mother made a remark about Elena's dress being a bit too bright for her complexion. Elena laughed lightly. "You're right," she said, hiding her trembling hands beneath the napkin. Every smile she gave that morning was a lie, perfectly shaped, perfectly timed. Later, as Daniel left for the office, he turned at the door. "Don't forget, the charity galas tonight. Wear something elegant, please." The word please sounded like a command. When the door closed, Elena let out a long breath she didn't know she was holding. Her smile dropped instantly, like a curtain at the end of a play. She wandered into the garden, barefoot, feeling the dampness of dew under her feet. The roses she had planted last spring had begun to wither, their petals bruised by early autumn. She knelt beside them, touching one gently, her fingers brushing over the soft decay. "Even beauty gets tired," she murmured. For the first time, she admitted the truth. She had been performing for years. Every word, every movement, every laugh had been rehearsed. And last night's wound had torn a hole in the mask. As she stood, the garden silence wrapped around her like a promise. She wasn't ready to fight yet, but the pretending had begun to hurt more than the truth itself. She walked back inside, fixed her face, and smiled once more. Tomorrow, she decided, the lies would start to crack. The gown lay across the bed. Silk, silver, expensive. Daniel had chosen it himself for the charity gala, saying it would hide what needs hiding. The words echoed in her mind as Elena stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection under the white vanity light. 4 years, that mirror had been her judge and her prison. Every wrinkle, every curve, every soft line had been measured against a silent standard she never met. She turned slightly, studying her profile, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch. The woman in the glass was tired, yes, but she was real. There were shadows under her eyes, faint lines around her mouth, and a curve to her body that no diet or insult could erase. Yet behind all that, there was something else, a quiet defiance. A spark she hadn't noticed before. She touched her own reflection, fingertips grazing the cold surface. "Who are you?" she whispered. The question trembled in the air like confession. In her memory, she saw the girl she once was, bold, laughing, painting barefoot in the old studio, never once wondering if she was enough. That girl had vanished somewhere between Daniel's compliments and criticisms, between social dinners and forced smiles. But now, staring into the mirror, Elena could almost see her again, faintly, behind the tired woman's eyes. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the gown. It shimmered in the lamplight. Beautiful, yes, but suffocating. Every thread felt like another expectation stitched into her skin. She exhaled slowly, then folded the gown back into its box. When the driver knocked to remind her of the gala, she smiled politely and said she wasn't feeling well. Daniel would go alone. He would hate that. After the car left, the house fell into silence. Elena poured herself a glass of red wine and stood before the mirror again, barefoot, still in her soft robe. She lifted the glass to her reflection. "To the woman who forgot herself," she said quietly, "and to the one who's finally remembering." The first sip burned her throat, but it also woke something deep inside. Not rage, not revenge, just truth. That night, for the first time in years, Elena didn't dress up to be seen. She stayed home to see herself. The morning after the gala she didn't attend, Elena walked through the city streets without makeup, without heels, without purpose. The air was crisp with the scent of rain and roasted coffee from nearby cafes. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing anywhere, wasn't expected to smile. She simply walked, invisible, unobserved, free in a way that frightened her. A small coffee shop on the corner caught her eye. It was old-fashioned, wooden chairs, a fogged-up window, soft music humming in the background. She stepped inside, her breath forming tiny clouds in the air-conditioned quiet. "Good morning," said a voice behind the counter. It belonged to a man about her age, his sleeves rolled up, flour dusting his forearms. He smiled, not the rehearsed kind people gave her at social events, but something warm and unguarded. "First time here." She nodded. "I was just walking." "Then you found the right place to rest," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Sit wherever you like." Elena took a seat near the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. She felt oddly small and safe, like a child hiding in a blanket fort. When the man brought her cup, she thanked him, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact startled her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone touched her without wanting something in return. "You look like someone who carries a lot," he said gently, setting down a napkin with her coffee. "Coffee's on the house today." She smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. "You shouldn't. I'm fine." "I didn't say you weren't," he replied with a shrug. "Sometimes people just need a small kindness." The words sank into her like warmth after cold rain. For a fleeting moment, she felt seen, not for her appearance, not for her husband's name, but for herself. When she left, he waved without asking her name. That, too, felt merciful. She walked home slowly, her steps lighter than when she'd left. That night, Daniel didn't notice anything different. But Elena knew something had shifted. Subtly, quietly, like a seed pressed into the dark earth. A stranger's kindness had reminded her that gentleness still existed, and she wanted to find that version of herself again, the one who could still feel warmth without apology. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed softly against the windows as Elena moved through the quiet house. Daniel was away on a business trip, or so he said. The silence was heavy, almost watchful. She could feel something stirring beneath it, like a secret waiting to be found. She hadn't meant to go into his study. For years, that room had been forbidden territory, a space she was told to keep tidy but untouched. But that afternoon, something inside her rebelled against the rules she'd been living under. The door creaked as she pushed it open. The scent of cedar and cologne lingered in the air. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, a man's version of order hiding a mess beneath. She began dusting idly, her eyes catching on the small drawer beneath his computer. It was locked. Her pulse quickened. Daniel never locked anything. At least, not before. She searched the desk, fingers trembling until they brushed against a key tucked behind a photo frame. The lock clicked open with a quiet, metallic sigh. Inside were envelopes, credit card statements, and a sleek black phone she didn't recognize. She pressed the power button. The screen lit up, and there it was. Messages, photos, hotels. Her husband's name intertwined with another woman's, their conversations sickeningly intimate. For a long moment, Elena couldn't breathe. It wasn't the betrayal itself that stunned her, it was how unsurprised she felt. Some part of her had known. The cruel words, the distance, the contempt, this was simply the proof. She sat down, the phone still in her hand, her heart strangely calm. No tears came this time. No shaking, no screaming. Just an eerie stillness, the kind that comes right before a storm. When she finally stood, she placed everything back exactly as she'd found it. But in her mind, something locked open and refused to close again. That night, she logged into their joint accounts, quietly transferring what was hers by right. Her inheritance, her savings, her dignity. Every number moved felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. By dawn, the drawer was still full of secrets. But only one thing had changed. Elena was no longer afraid to open them. The next morning, the house felt colder, not because of the weather, but because Elena now saw it differently. Every picture frame, every polished surface whispered of pretense. The marble floors gleamed like ice, reflecting a life that had never truly belonged to her. She sat at the breakfast table, silent, stirring her tea long after it had gone cold. Across from her, Daniel's mother, Evelyn, folded a newspaper and sighed dramatically. "You've let yourself go, dear," she said without looking up. "A wife should always remain desirable. Men have needs, you know." The words landed like needles, but Elena didn't flinch. She only smiled faintly, her eyes calm, almost pitying. "You're right," she murmured. "Men do have needs. Some of them need women to blame for their own failures." Evelyn blinked, startled. She wasn't used to being answered, certainly not by Elena. "What did you say?" "Nothing," Elena replied softly, standing up. "I'll make more tea." But inside, her silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. Every word she didn't speak built a wall between who she was and who she was becoming. That afternoon, Elena visited the old law firm her late father once trusted. The receptionist recognized her instantly. "Mrs. Hartwell, it's been years." The name tasted foreign on her tongue. Soon, she would change it back to Elena Ward, her own. In the lawyer's office, she learned how much Daniel had managed on her behalf. Her inheritance invested in his name, her trust fund merged into joint accounts. Theft disguised as love. The lawyer's tone was respectful but edged with quiet anger. "We can recover this," he assured her. "But it will take discretion." Discretion. The very thing she had been perfecting all her life. When she returned home, Daniel called from his trip, his voice distant and distracted. "You sound quiet," he said. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she replied. "Everything's fine." But her tone carried a new weight, the kind that made him pause before hanging up. That night, she looked out the window at the storm gathering beyond the trees. Her silence had once been a cage. Now it was armor. And as thunder rolled across the sky, Elena realized something beautiful. He still had no idea what her silence was hiding. Elena woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, or dangerous. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching Daniel sleep beside her. His mouth hung slightly open, peaceful, unaware. She wondered how many times she'd looked at him like this before, mistaking comfort for safety. Today would be different. She dressed simply, black trousers, a cream blouse, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. No perfume, no jewelry. She didn't want to carry any of this house's scent with her. Downstairs, she brewed one last pot of coffee, letting its warmth fill the kitchen. The steam fogged the window as morning light began to bloom. Daniel appeared in the doorway, yawning. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied with a small smile. "I have errands today." He grunted, already checking his phone, scrolling through messages from the woman she now knew existed. She poured him coffee, the way she always had. Milk first, 2 spoons of sugar. The ritual felt hollow now, like acting out a part she'd already outgrown. When he left for work, she watched from the window as his car disappeared down the drive. Then she turned to the table, where a single envelope waited, her note. 3 sentences written in her steady, graceful handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me how much silence costs. Don't look for me. You wouldn't recognize who I've become." She set her wedding ring on top of it. It caught the light briefly, a final flash before the end. By noon, she had visited the bank, finalized transfers, and signed the documents that returned her inheritance to her own name. The lawyer had arranged the sale of the mansion. Quiet, legal, irreversible. When Daniel came home that evening, the house would still look the same. Flowers fresh, dinner half prepared, but she would be gone. No shouting, no drama. Just absence. Elena stepped outside, a single suitcase in hand. The wind lifted her hair as she walked toward the waiting cab. Behind her, the house stood silent, unaware it had been abandoned by its heart. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt weightless. The sea was the first thing she heard every morning, a low, endless murmur that sounded like forgiveness. Elena had rented a small cottage at the edge of a quiet coastal town, far from the polished streets and false smiles of her old life. The paint on the shutters was chipped, the furniture secondhand, but to her, it was freedom. She woke early each day, made coffee on a small gas stove, and stood by the open window as the breeze tangled her hair. The air smelled of salt and wet sand, raw, alive. There were no maids, no schedules, no husband. Only the ocean and herself. At first, the silence unnerved her. Without the constant noise of someone else's demands, her thoughts became louder. Memories, regrets, small wounds reopening. Some mornings she cried without knowing why. But she didn't run from it. She let the waves teach her how to breathe again. In, out, and let go. One afternoon, while walking along the shoreline, she met the man from the coffee shop, Adrian. He was photographing the horizon, the wind whipping his hair across his face. When he recognized her, he smiled that same unguarded smile. "I thought you disappeared," he said. "I did," she answered softly. "In the best way." They talked as they walked, about the sea, about starting over, about how healing isn't beautiful, just necessary. He didn't pry, and she didn't explain. Somehow, he seemed to understand that she was rebuilding from ashes too delicate to touch. Days turned into weeks. Elena began volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others find safe places to land. Listening to their stories, she realized pain could become purpose. Each time she helped someone fill out a form or make a call, she felt a little lighter herself. In the evenings, she sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the sky darken into indigo. Sometimes Adrian would stop by with coffee, and they'd talk quietly, not about the past, but about possibilities. For the first time in her life, she wasn't someone's wife or ornament or burden. She was simply Elena, a woman with salt on her skin, strength in her voice, and a horizon that finally belonged to her. It had been 6 months since Elena left her old life behind. The sea had become her confidant, the waves her rhythm. The cottage now smelled of lavender and paint. She had begun to fill canvases again, splashes of color that looked like freedom. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, she heard a car on the gravel road, an unfamiliar sound in this quiet place. Her heart stilled, instinctively alert. When she stepped outside, she saw him. Daniel. He looked older, thinner, his tailored confidence replaced by exhaustion. His eyes scanned the small cottage, disbelief twisting his features. So this is where you've been hiding, he said. I wasn't hiding, Elena replied calmly. I was living. He laughed, a sound brittle and hollow. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? The accounts, the investors, everything fell apart. People think I stole from you. Elena crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. You did, she said simply. You just didn't think I'd notice. He took a step closer, anger flickering in his eyes. You can't just vanish like that. After everything I've given you. She cut him off. You gave me nothing but shame. Her voice was soft, steady, the way a sea cuts stone, slowly, endlessly. Daniel's expression faltered. For a brief moment she saw fear, not of her, but of the truth she carried so easily now. I made mistakes, he said, voice trembling between pride and desperation. We can fix this. Come home. Elena smiled, not cruelly, but with the quiet mercy of someone who's already mourned. There is no home to go back to. I built this one myself. He looked around, bewildered. This, he said, gesturing to the small cottage, the chipped paint, the sea beyond. Yes, she said. It's small, but it's honest. Everything in it is mine, even the silence. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He muttered something about lawyers, about reputation, but his words fell away in the wind. When he finally left, Elena stood at the edge of the water, the last light dissolving into dusk. She felt no rage, no triumph, only peace. The ghost of her past had returned, but this time, she didn't let it in. The morning after Daniel's visit, the sky was the color of silver water, calm, endless, untouched. Elena stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The sea was restless today, waves curling and breaking like they carried her story away piece by piece. She hadn't slept much. Not because of fear, but because of reflection. Last night's encounter had closed a door she hadn't realized was still open. Daniel's voice no longer echoed inside her. It was only noise carried off by the wind. She walked down the narrow path to the shore, her bare feet sinking into cool sand. The tide rolled forward, washing over her toes, pulling back with a soft hiss, as if whispering goodbye. Elena thought about the woman she used to be, the one who hid bruises under silence, who smiled to survive dinners filled with disdain. That version of herself had been fragile, yes, but she had also been brave enough to stay alive long enough to change. Without her, this moment wouldn't exist. Behind her, the little cottage glowed in the early light. Inside were canvases full of color, letters from the women she'd helped at the shelter, and the beginnings of a book she'd started writing. She wasn't sure if anyone would ever read it, but it didn't matter. It was hers, her truth in ink. A familiar voice called from behind her. Adrian stood a few steps away, camera slung around his neck. You always come here when the sea's loud, he said. It reminds me that even storms calm down, Elena replied, smiling. He walked beside her, snapping a photo of the horizon. What will you do now? She looked toward the sun breaking through the clouds. Live. Simply. Honestly. And never apologize for existing. They stood together in silence, watching the tide move in and out. Elena took a deep breath, the salt air filling her lungs. He once said my body disgusted him, she said quietly, more to herself than to Adrian. But this body carried me here, through pain, through fire, through everything. She turned away from the sea, the wind tugging gently at her hair. The path behind her was washed clean, no footprints left. For the first time in her life, Elena didn't look back.